Erev Tov, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our final installment of the Megilat Esther series here on the Finding Holiness podcast. Happy you can join us tonight as we conclude this very, very special Sefer Megilat Esther just in time for the holiday of Purim. First of all, we have to mention our sponsors. This shiur is graciously sponsored in memory of Mrs. Alegria Ben Maman, Zichrona Livracha, Alegria Batrika, by her loving grandchildren and family. May the words of Torah, may the chidushim that we give off tonight be leilu nishmata ti nafsha tzerura bitzror ha'chaim. It's been an eventful journey as we began 5 weeks ago, this being part 6 of our series. 5 weeks ago, we looked at so many different insights. We looked at so many beautiful hidushim and explanations of this Megillah according to the peshat, to the literal sense of the word. And tonight, Bezrat Hashem, we are going to continue and conclude the Megillah with the ninth and largest chapter, Perek Tet, and the little chapter of Perek Yud. So although the title does say chapters 9 and number 10, it's really mostly chapter 9, the ninth Perek, as there's only 2 Pesukim in Perek Yud in the 10th chapter. As in previous weeks, I do strongly recommend that you have a Chumash with you, a text of the Megillah, so you can follow along with me. The Megillah is often found at the end of Sefer Shemot. If you have an entire Chumash, if you are holding a Tanakh, it could be found towards the end in the Ketubim section of the Tanakh. But if you happen not to have one of those options, you can always just sit here and listen. I will recite every pasuk. I will translate every pasuk for your listening pleasure. So once again, Beruchim Aba'im, welcome everyone who is listening to us live tonight or in the future on our podcast, findingholiness.com or findingholiness.buzzsprout.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you hear your podcast. Again, happy to have you join us. Without further ado, we are going to begin Perek Tet, the 9th chapter in Megilat Esther. At this point, the Jews have successfully, the Jews are about to defend themselves on the 13th of Adar, which was the day slated for the entire provinces of Ahasuerus to lay siege and wage war against the Jewish people, based that they were going to open that first edict, that first letter that was sent out by Haman so long ago. So that's where we are now. Perek Tet, Pasuk Aleph. The Pasuk says, Ubishnem Asar Chodesh, Hu Chodesh Adar. Then in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, Bishlosha Asar Yom Bo, on the 13th day, Asher Higia Devar HaMelech Vedato Lehe'asot, when the king's command and edict were about to be enforced, Bayom Asher Siberu Oyeve HaYehudim Lishlot Bahem, Ve'na'afochu Asher Yishletu HaYehudim Hema Besonehem. On that day that the enemies of the Jews were expected to prevail over them, it was turned about. Ve'na'afochu, this is where the song comes from. Asher Yishletu HaYehudim Hema Besonehem, the Jews prevailed over their adversaries. There is a difference between an oyev and a soneh. An oyev is an enemy that outright hates you and seeks to inflict harm constantly. The soneh, the hater, is he who rejoices at the failure and the falling of those who he hates into the hands of his enemy. The chidush here is that everything was v'nahapochu. The Jews were able to overcome their oyevim. They were able to overcome their enemies, in which the odds of success were extremely low. But at the same time, even the sonim, even those who hated them, they couldn't believe it. They were going to Las Vegas and placing odds on who was going to win this battle. And the Jews were heavy underdogs. They didn't stand a chance. They were so in shock with what was. It was a total v'nahapochu, and their total understanding, their expectations were totally totally flipped. Pasuk bet. Nikalu haYehudim be'arehem. The Jews organized themselves in their cities. Bechol medinot hamelech Ahashverosh. In all the provinces of the king Ahashverosh. Lishloach yad b'mevakshe ra'atam. To send forth their hand against those who sought to hurt them. Ve'ish lo amad lifnehem. And no man could stand before them. Ki nafal pahdam al kol ha'amim. For fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. Upon all the peoples. The Nikalu Yehudim, the Jewish people, were the ones who all of a sudden came out together to strike. Even the ones that were hiding, who were fearful of the war. In any battle, you have those that don't want to partake. In any battle, you have those that are hiding in shelters. You are hiding in attics, in roofs, in basements, because they don't want to be near the fighting. And there were Jews that did not want to defend themselves. The Chachamim explain over here that all of a sudden these scared individuals who normally didn't want to fight, they came out and they came out to fight. Why? Because all of a sudden they felt confident. I think we have a chance to win. I think they felt good at this moment. You can call it jumping on the bandwagon. You can call it just joining in the right time. But all of a sudden, Nikalu haYehudim be'arehem. All of a sudden, everyone comes. Why? Ki nafal pachdam al kol ha'amim. Because there was a pachad. There was an actual fear instilled amongst all the nations about the Jews. Nobody wanted to mess with the Jews anymore. Pasuk Gimel. V'kol sarei medinot. And all the officials of the provinces. V'achashtarpenim v'apachot. The governors. V'osei ha'melacha shel hamelech. And those that conduct the king's affairs. Menaseim et haYehudim. They exalted the Jews. Ki nafal pachad Mordechai alehem. For the fear of Mordechai had fallen upon them. There was a specific pachad for Mordechai. It wasn't just now that they feared the Jews, but there was a fear because of what Mordechai had accomplished, because of his newly appointed position, the power of his position. I want to think maybe that power is what kept him going to now, or the power that he possessed came as a result of what kept him going, which is the Torah and mitzvot, the Torah, the Tehillim, the tza'akot, the fasting, the tzedakah that he had to give during these moments. That's what gave him that koach, and that's what allowed the pachad to be effective. It allowed the fear factor to work, because he felt that he had merit now with what he did. I have mitzvot on my back. I have zechuyot, I have tzedakah in my pockets. And hence the people are going to begin, or had started to fear him. Ki gadol Mordechai bebet hamelech. For Mordechai was now preeminent in the royal palace. V'shom'o holech bechol hamedinot. And his fame was spreading throughout the provinces. Ki ha'ish Mordechai holech vegadol. For the man Mordechai grew increasingly greater as time went on. Pasuk Hey. Vayaku haYehudim bechol oivehem. The Jews struck at all their enemies. Makat cherev vehereg ve'avdan. The stroke of the sword, the slaughtering, the annihilating. Vaya'asu besonehem kirsonam. And they treated their enemies as they pleased. Those who acted openly with hostility, despite the second edict, despite the second letter that said that the Jews are not bad, that you should not attack the Jews, that the Jews have the right to defend themselves, there are still those that went out to attack. And they were knocked down. They were slaughtered and annihilated. They were taken out instantly. Ufshushan habira haregu haYehudim ve'abed 500 ish. in Shushan, the capital, the Jews slew and annihilated 500 men. Hamesh me'ot ish. According to the Targum, all of these men were Amalekim. They're all from the tribe of Amalek, as were the 300 in, we're going to see in Pasuk Tetvav later on, they were also Amalekim, and as well an additional 75 mentioned in Tetzain, Pasuk Tetzain. All of these people were Amalekim. These 500 people, why they mentioned here specifically, these were the strongest supporters of Haman. How do I know that? Simple. Because look where they fought. They fought in Shushan Habirah. They had no shame to fight in the king's quarters, right there in the capital. It must have been the people that felt loyal to Haman even after Haman is dead. He's hung on a tree. He's got absolutely no power. He's a farce. He was proven guilty for attempting to perform genocide on an entire nation, and there were still people who were loyal to him. These were the 500 people that were killed in Shushan Habirah, right outside of the palace. And then the Megillah goes on to list the 10 sons of Haman. Ve'et Parshandata, ve'et Talfon, ve'et Aspata, ve'et Porata, ve'et Adalia, ve'et Aridata, ve'et Parmashta, ve'et Arisai, ve'et Aridai, ve'et Vaizata, Aseret, Pene Haman Beramedata. These are the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamedata. Sorera Yehudim, Haragu, the Jews' enemy, which they killed. Ubabiza lo shalchu et yadam, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils. So Haman actually had many, many sons. So why were these sons, these 10, singled out? So the Rashi wants to say the following, that they were responsible for the ones that were, for the letters that were dispatched in the king's name. Which letters specifically? The letters that forbade the Jewish people from rebuilding the second Bet HaMikdash. They were the ones who were responsible for those letters. Some say they even managed to convince the king for sure not to do it, to resume the reconstruction of the Bet HaMikdash. According to the Midrash Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, Haman had another 30 sons in other lands, but these were the 10 that were the scribes of the king, similar to what Rashi says, that they were the ones who distributed the letters. Here, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is saying they were actually the writers, the scribes of those letters. The Targum says Haman had many, many more sons, more than the 10 mentioned here. One of them was Shimshai, whose name is not mentioned in these 10, but Shimshai was actually the king's personal secretary. You called the 1-800 Ahashverosh number, and you got to Shimshai. That's who one of Haman's sons were. He was killed by the sword, probably among these 500. He was not of these 10 that were hung. And there were another 180 among the 500 enemies killed in the capital that some say there were part of Haman's sons. And there are those that believe, according to Megillah, that there were an additional 70 sons of Haman who were together with his widow, Zeresh, which we're going to talk about later, who became wanderers. Nevertheless, each son was prominent in their own way and equal to the 500 men that were murdered before, that were mentioned before. That's why they were given their own line. If you look at the Megillah, the 10 sons of Haman have to be written on their own line, otherwise Megillah is not kasher. So they were given their own line because of that. In fact, the Midrash tells us that the last son, Vaizata, the Vav is enlarged, is elongated, and the reason why that is the case is because all 10 sons were hung on the same pole. The pole was so long that they had them stacked vertically all the way up. It wasn't 10 individual gallows that were made for the sons of Haman, but rather it was one long pole, as symbolized by that Vav in Vaizata. Notice how Bnei Israel, or the Jewish people, didn't take any spoils. They Took no spoils. Why not? Why not take it? That's war. You win a war, you grab the spoils. So they actually had smart thinking here at this moment. They left the spoils for the king in order to win his favor. You still want to be on the good side of the king. The king is still in charge. Ahasuerus is not going anywhere. So they left it there so that the king could take it, is what's brought down in the Ebenezer. Moving on to Pasuk Yud Aleph in Perek Tet. Vayomahu ba mispar harugim b'Shushan Abira lifnei HaMelech. That day, the number of those killed in Shushan Abira was reported to the king. From the number of dead that was reported, Ahasuerus came to appreciate how precarious the situation actually was for the Jews. And he encouraged Esther, says Yalshich, to make a further request on their behalf. But at the same time, Vayomer HaMelech Pasuk Yudbet, Vayomer HaMelech leEsther HaMurka b'Shushan Abira haregu Yehudim ve'abed 500 ish. In Shushan, the capital, the Jews have slain and annihilated 500 men. Ve'et Aser b'nei Haman, and the 10 sons of Haman. Bishar medinot HaMelech me'asu. What have they done in the rest of the provinces? Ma shelatech ve'inaten lach, u'ma bakashatech od ve'te'as. What is your request now? It shall be granted to you. What is your petition? It shall be fulfilled. So the Alshich says that the Megillah in Masechet Megillah, the Talmud in Masechet Megillah says that the tone of this pasuk, the way Ahasuerus is wording the question, it's clear that he was on the verge to say something really, really harsh here. What do you, Esther, do you not see what happened? 500 people are now dead in the capital of Shushan. The Jews have killed 10 sons of Haman. Can you imagine what's going on in the other provinces? And you would think that what comes afterwards would halt, ceasefire instantly of this attack. But that's not what happens. He then says, Ma shelatech ve'inaten lach, ma bakashatech od ve'te'as. What is your request? It shall be granted. What is your petition? It shall be fulfilled. And this must have been a miracle, says the Gemara. There was a miraculous intervention that caused his mood to return to a good one, because that's not how the pasuk started. Pasuk Gimel. But Tomer Esther. Esther says, okay, you asked me for a request. Im ala melech tov. If it pleases the king, Yinaten gam mahar la Yehudim asher b'Shushan. Let tomorrow also be given to the Jews in Shushan. La'asot kedat hayom, to act like they did today. Ve'et aseret b'nei Haman yitlu ala etz, and let Haman's 10 sons be hung on the gallows. These are the bodies of the 10 sons that were mentioned in the previous psukim that we read. And the reason why she requested this, says the Malbim, is to instill fear in the remaining enemies. There were still people fighting. So, want to instill fear. They see the dead bodies hanging on the gallows. Hey, who did that? The Jews? Oh, I don't want to mess with the Jews. These were the gallows, the Targum says, that was 50 cubits together with the father, with Haman himself. Vayomer HaMelech lehe'asot ken. So the king ordered that this shall be done. V'tinaten dat b'Shushan, and a decree was distributed in Shushan. V'et aseret b'nei Haman talu, and they hung Haman's 10 sons. Where was Zeresh? Where did she go? We don't hear from her anymore. So the Midrash tells us that she took 70 of her sons and she fled. And she actually became a pauper. She became a very poor person, collecting alms from door to door. A person just knocking. A woman who was considered and thought to be one of the wealthiest, prestigious Isha Hashuva, and now all of a sudden she is there collecting grain just to stay alive. Her and her 70 sons. She literally lost all of her fortune and was left with really not much. But she did remain alive. And why is that the case? I didn't see anything written, but I want to say maybe that the reason why she was kept alive is because she changed her tone in the end. She realized, as we learned in the previous shiur, that there was no way you were going to beat Mordechai. It just wasn't going to happen. She understood that being that Mordechai had God on his side, being that Mordechai came from the Yehudim, and he had that emunah, she tried convincing Haman, you're not going to beat him. You won't be able to defeat him. And that recognition was enough of a zechut, of a merit, to keep her alive during this time. Pasuk Tedvav. Vayika'alu Yehudim asher b'Shushan. The Jews that were in Shushan assembled Gam beyom arba'a asar lechodesh Adar, also on the 14th month of Adar. Vayahargu b'Shushan shelosh me'ot ish. And they slew 300 men on the 14th. Ubabizal lo shalchu et yadam, but they did not lay their hands on the spoils. 300. This was fewer than day number one. Day number one was 500. Simple explanation is because the enemy got scared. After you lose 500 men, then they didn't want to really go out and fight much again. So they only 300 died in the second battle in Shushan. Ushara Yehudim, pasuk Tetzayin. Ushara Yehudim asher b'mdinot hamelech. The rest of the Jews that were in the king's provinces, nikalu ve'amod al nafsham. They assembled and defended themselves. Ve'noach me'oibehem, gaining relief from their foes. Ve'harog besonehem, chamisha v'shivim aleph. And they slayed in total 75,000 of their enemies. Uva bizal lo shalchu et yadam, and they did not lay their hand on spoils. Beyom shelosha asar lechodesh Adar, on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Ve'noach be'arba'a asar bo, and they gained relief on the 14th day of Adar. Ve'aso oto, and they made it Yom Mishteh Simcha, a day of feasting and gladness. They felt relief. Ve'noach. How did they feel relief? They felt relief because they only fought one day. For the Jews outside of Shushan, they only fought on the 13th. So the 14th was a day of relief. It was a day of celebration where they were able to enjoy a feast. That was for everybody outside the city of Shushan. But remember, Esther already requested that the city of Shushan be able to fight one more day. So pasuk Yuched, Yehudim asher b'Shushan, but the Jews that were in Shushan, nikalu b'shlosha asar bo, they assembled on the 13th, ube'arba'a asar bo, and on the 14th. When did they get relief? Ve'noach b'chamisha asar bo. They got relief on the 15th. Ve'aso oto yom mishteh ve'simcha, and they made it a day of feasting and gladness. Alken, and therefore, haYehudim haperazim hayoshvim be'arei haperazot, the Jewish villagers who lived in unwalled towns, osim et yom arba asar lechodesh Adar, then they make the 14th day of Adar, which is like we celebrate Purim outside of walled cities, simcha u'mishteh b'yom tov, gladness, feasting, and a festival, u'mishloach manot ish lere'ehu, and as well for sending delicacies to one another. So simcha, mishteh b'yom tov. Simcha, gladness, means no eulogies. Not allowed to have eulogies on Purim. Mishteh, you have to have a feast. It's asur to fast, asur beta'anit on Purim, and Yom Tov. Initially, when Mordechai declared and Esther declared this as a holy day, it was a Yom Tov. They weren't allowed to do work. Eventually, it was changed that work was allowed to be done. But as Shulchan Aruch is posek, that even though work is allowed to be done on Purim, en no roeh siman beracha, a person that does work on Purim will not see any blessing from that work. So it's always best to avoid work on the holiday of Purim, because originally it was declared as a Yom Tov. Umishloach manot. Okay, mishloach manot, of course, is the requirement to send 2 edible foods, 2 edible items to at least one person. Mishloach manot ish lere'ehu, to his friend. This is all hinted in this pasuk and later on as well in pasuk Kaf Bet, as we're going to see. But we are now pasuk Kaf. verse 20, Vayichtov Mordechai et hadebarim ha'ele. Mordechai recorded these events, Vayishlach sefarim et kol haYehudim, and sent letters to all the Jews, asher bekol medinot Amelech Ahasuerus, who were in all the provinces of Ahasuerus, hakerovim ve'arechokim, both the near ones and as well the distant ones. So what exactly did he write down? As the pasuk says, Mordechai wrote down all these things. So Rashi says he wrote down the Megillah, the exact Megillah that we have it right now. These 9 full chapters and a little bit of 10. That's what he wrote down according to Rashi. Some say he only wrote down a brief summary that is going to be read in pasuk Kaf Daled and Kafei, verse 24 and 25, which was a summary to persuade all the Jews to accept the celebration of the holiday of Purim as law. That's what the Vilna Gaon says and the Malbim. Some say that it's anything from the upcoming pasuk Kaf Aleph all the way to the end of the Megillah. So different explanations of what exactly Mordechai wrote down in this pasuk. Moving on to pasuk Kaf Aleph, lekayem alehem, charging them or commanding them, liot osim, to observe, et yom arba'a asar lechodesh Adar, annually the 14th day of the month of Adar, ve'et yom chamisha asar bo bekol shana v'shana, on the its 15th day every single year. So the walled city, the unwalled cities we mentioned, they already began to celebrate Purim on the 14th. We mentioned that in pasuk Yud Zayin. Now, in this pasuk, Mordechai's objective was to convince the Jews living in the walled cities that they had reason to celebrate, but not on the 14th, on the 15th. Because the nobles in the walled city, Haman's representatives, they knew of both letters. We spoke about this earlier in the Megillah. The residents of the walled cities knew of both letters, and therefore the edict that called for the Jews to defend themselves was valid only on the 13th, but Haman's edict had no time limit, which means that tragedy, disaster, annihilation, Chas v'Shalom, was still very much a possibility. And it was only after the 14th had passed of Adar, only that when that day had passed without incident, that is when it was clear to the nobles that they rejected the first edict altogether, and on the 15th they were able to celebrate. And that's what's being what Mordechai wanted to. He wanted to persuade the Jews in the walled cities at this point. Pasuk Kaf Bet, Kayamim asher nachu ba'em haYehudim oivehem, as the days on which the Jews gained relief from their enemies. Ve'achodesh asher nepach lahem miyagon lesimcha ume'evel leyom tov, and the month which had been turned from them from one of sorrow to gladness. La'asot otam yemei mishteh besimcha, and from morning to festival, to observe them as feasting, as gladness. Umishloach manot ish lere'eu, sending delicacies to one another. Umatanot la'evyonim, and as well gifts to the poor. So we already spoke about mishloach manot, sending 2 foods to one person. Matanot la'evyonim is 2 gifts to 2 people. In other words, 1 gift to each of 2 people. That is the mitzvah of matanot la'evyonim. The idea, the rationale of giving, of Mordechai wanting for us to give, or the Jews to give matanot la'evyonim, was he wanted the poor people to experience the joy in the celebration. They didn't want to be left out. If all of Klal Yisrael is celebrating their victory, then he wanted all of Klal Yisrael to celebrate their victory, including those who were desolate and didn't have the means to do so. So matanot la'evyonim is clear. One of the greater mitzvot that we have on this holiday. Pasuk Kav Gimel, Vekibel haYehudim et asher hechelu la'asot. The Jews undertook to continue what they had just begun to do. Vet asher katav Mordechai alehem, just as Mordechai had prescribed to them. So what is the Jews undertook to continue the practice that they had begun. that Mordechai prescribed to them. So according to the Malbim, this is where the unwalled cities agreed to continue celebrating on the 14th, like they had already begun to do, while the walled cities agreed to celebrate on the 15th, as Mordechai prescribed for them. That's the interpretation of this pasuk by the Malbim. Some say that it's the feast, the mitzvah of the Mishteh. They already started celebrating. Now it becomes almost like a law. And the Vilna Gaon wants to say that what Mordechai prescribed refers to the Mishloach Manot and the Matanot Le'Evyonim. This was something new. Okay, one thing's I have my own feast with my family, and I celebrate, but now to go and actually send gifts to my friends and to send gifts to the poor is something different. And that is what Mordechai had prescribed for them. Pasuk Kav Daled. Ki Haman ben Hamedata Agagi, for Haman, the son of Hamedata, the Agagite, Torer kol HaYehudim, enemy of all the Jews, Hashav al HaYehudim le'abedam, had plotted to annihilate the Jews. Vehipil pur hu agoral, and had cast a lot, that is the lot, leumam ulabedam, to terrify and to annihilate them. Haman was Tzorer kol HaYehudim. Haman's grudge was not just against Mordechai, as we mentioned earlier, but it was to all Jews. In many ways, he was worse than Paro. Paro, of course, was only Gazar ala Zecharim. He only decreed against the males. But Haman was to men, children, women, everybody was included in that decree. And that is why the famous Gemara in Masechet Pesachim and other places, that Nashim Hayavot, in all the mitzvot, women are obligated to perform the mitzvot of Pesach. They're obligated to perform the mitzvot of Purim, the mitzvot of Hanukkah, even though that they are time-bound mitzvot, which normally a mitzvah tashes as mangrama, any positive mitzvah that is time-bound, women are exempt from doing. In these situations, they are obligated. Says Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, why? She'afem hayu be'oto hanes, because they were part of the miracle. What does part of the miracle mean? It's machloket between Rashbam and Tosafot. What does it mean they were part of the miracle? The Rashbam says that the women were instrumental in bringing about the salvation. So in the case of Purim, that means Esther. Esther was a lady, of course, and she was very much instrumental in bringing about the salvation. And that's why women are obligated to performing the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah, Matanot Le'Evyonim, Mishloach Manot, and the Mishteh, of course. And same thing with Hanukkah. Yehudit was very instrumental. And in Yetziat Mitzrayim, there was Shifran Puah, or Miriam and Yocheved, who were very much contributed to the saving of Jewish children and baby boys. That's the opinion of the Rashbam. Tosafot wants to say, like we explained right now, Tosafot says it wasn't the fact that women were instrumental in the salvation, but rather women were included in the decree. And therefore, Haman wanted to kill all the Jews. It wasn't just the men. He wanted to kill all the Jews. Even the ladies were suffering with enslavement in Purim. The ladies were abused and violated in the time of Hanukkah by the Greeks. So the ladies suffered as well. And because of that, they are obligated in the performance of the miracle according to Tosafot. Pasuk Kaf Hey. Ubevoa livnei hamelech. But when she appeared before the king, Amari Masefer, he commanded by means of letters, Yasuv mahashavto hara'a asher chashav al haYehudim al rosho. He commanded by means of letters that Haman's scheme, which he devised against the Jews, should recoil on his own head. V'talu oto v'banav al ha'etz, and they hanged him and his sons on the gallows. Amar im hasefer. Mordechai, this strange use of terms over here, literally it means he said on the scroll or on the book. Some of the Mefarshim are explain that Mordechai wanted specifically to mention in the Megillah that Esther had come to the king to save the Jews' lives. It was really, really her. Called Megilat Esther. We spoke about this in the first or second shiur of this series, but he wanted that specifically in the book. That's Amari Masefer. Alken, Kareu layamim ha'ele Purim. We're in Pasuk Avav. Therefore, they called these days Purim al Shem HaPur, because from the word Pur, the lottery. Again, al kol divrei igeret hazot. Therefore, because of all that was written in this letter, umarau al kacha, and what they had seen concerning this, umaigia alehem, and what has happened to them. The main miracle that was the Pur was overturning the influences of the astrologers that was represented by the Pur. Plus, of course, there was a huge delay. The Pur turned out to be a miracle because it only landed 12 months from now. So therefore, the Jews had time to prepare rather than be killed immediately. Imagine if Haman would have picked out a day in the immediate future. The Jews wouldn't have known. It would have been much more disastrous. Pasuk Kaf Zain. Vekibelu haYehudim alehem. The Jews confirmed and undertook upon themselves, ve'al zaram, and their children, their offspring, ve'akol hanilvim alehem, and anyone who might join them, ve'lo ya'avor, without fail, liot osim et shenei hayamim ha'ele kichtavam v'chizmanam be'kol shana v'shana, to observe these 2 days in their prescribed manner, in their proper time each year. Which means that kol hanilvim alehem, and upon all those who might join them. Says Rashi, future converts. Future converts were obligated to accept these holidays and be part of the simha. Pasuk Kafchet, v'ayamim ha'ele, these days, nizkarim v'na'asim bechol dor vador, should be remembered and celebrated by every generation, mishpaha u'mishpaha, every family, Medina umdina, every province, ve'ir va'ir, in every city. V'imei Purim ha'ele lo ya'avru mitoch ha'Yehudim. These days of Purim should never cease from among the Jews. Ve'zichram lo yasuf bizaram, nor shall their remembrance perish from their descendants. Niskarim be'na'asim. They are remembered by the fact that we publicly read Megilat Esther on the holiday, and it's na'asim, it's observed by the feasting, by the fact that we send gifts to our friends, by the fact that we send gifts to the poor people, says Rashi. This is how the holiday becomes an action. It becomes something tangible by the fact that we perform these mitzvot. V'imei Purim ha'ele, these days of Purim shall never cease, and the memory shall never die out. The rabbis said from this pasuk, we are assured by Nevuah that the book of Esther, Megilat Esther, was written with this divine inspiration. It was written Beruach HaKodesh. Not only that, it's from this pasuk we see that Purim will never be annulled. While the other holidays in the time of Mashiach will no longer exist, but Purim will still be here. The reading of Megilat Esther will continue to take place, as is mentioned in this pasuk. Pasuk Kaftet. Vatichtov Esther HaMalka Bat Abihail. The Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, wrote, Umordechai HaYehudi, along with Mordechai the Jew, et kol tokef, with full authority, lekayem et igeret hapurim azot hashenit, to ratify the second letter of Purim. With full authority, et kol tokef. The sages at the time, says the Malbim, they were reluctant to institute a new holiday. We're going to have a new holiday? Are we allowed to make a new holiday? They were worried. But Mordechai requested it. So what did Esther do? She backed Mordechai et kol tokef with the authority of her position. And at the same time, she requested from the Anshe Knesset Agdolah to make her book, the Megilat Esther, part of the biblical canon, part of the 24 books of Tanakh. That's et kol tokef. Rashi wants to say that the meaning of et kol tokef was that they wrote about the power of each personality that was involved in the story of Purim. Mordechai and Esther had to teach the Jewish people why this story happened. Let's not forget that 9 years prior, the Jewish people sinned at the feast of Ahasuerus. 9 years later, they are saved by Hakadosh Baruch Hu. And last but not least, in this pasuk, this is the first time that we see who Esther's father was. Esther Hamalka Bat Abihail. Now we could reveal her lineage. Now we know who she is, because now she felt proud of where she came from. She's a Jew. And that's why the Pasuk refers to her as Esther Malka Bat Abihail. Moving on to Pasuk Lamed, verse 30. Vaishlach Sefarim et kol ha-Yehudim el sheva ve'esim u'mea medina. Dispatches were sent to all the Jews to the 127 provinces. Malchut Hashverosh, in the kingdom of Hashverosh, Divrei Shalom ve'emet, with words of peace and truth. They wrote words of peace to appease anyone who had opposed to that request of a new holiday, and they wrote words of truth to show that they were on firm legal ground from Jewish law. Once you have it accepted by Anshe Knesset Agdolah, by the Bedin, that's it, it's done. Someone says a Ma'am Loez, what does it mean, truth and peace? Divrei Shalom ve'emet, so that they can merit the building of the Bet HaMikdash, the second Bet HaMikdash, which was yet to be built. That only stands on Emet v'Shalom, on truth and peace, and that's what they were hinting in these letters that were sent out. Pasuk Lamed Aleph, lekayem et yemei Purim ha'ele bizmanehem, to establish these days of Purim on their proper dates. Kasher kiyam alehem Mordechai Yehudi v'Esther Malka, just as Mordechai the Jew and Queen Esther had enjoined them. V'chasher kimu al nafsham ve'al zar'am, and they confirmed upon themselves and their children, divrei atzomot ve'za'akatam, and their lamentations, divrei atzomot ve'za'akatam, the fast and their accompanying lamentations, as a precedent for adopting a day of remembrance that did not come from the Torah. What did Esther do? She cited the 4 fasts over the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Tisha B'Av, Shiva Asar B'Tamuz, Asara B'Tevet, and Tzom Gedalia, which came after. All these 4 fasts have to do, which were instituted later. So she brought it up to the members who were opposed to this, and says, listen, we have 4 fasts that have to do with the destruction that were brought up by the Chachamim. So why can't we have a holiday? Some want to say that it wasn't for the holiday why she mentioned this. It was to decree Ta'anit Esther. It was to decree yet another fast, which was going to be observed on the 13th of Adar, as what we do. The 13th of Adar, we fast this Ta'anit. That's how the Ibn Ezra explains this. Pasuk Lamed Bet. Uma'amar Esther kiyam divrei Purim ha'ele benichtav b'sefer. Esther's law confirmed these regulations for Purim, and it was recorded in a book. It was ratified. Her argument, some say her authority as queen, was successful in the fact that she was able to persuade and convince the Chachamim that the holiday takes effect, or the fast takes effect, or both of them take effect. Benichtav b'sefer, and it's written in a book. Eventually, the Chachamim acceded to the request, and Megilat Esther, the book of Esther, became part of Tanakh, says Rashi. According to Ibn Ezra, it's this whole thing is talking about a second letter which was recorded in a book which we don't that doesn't exist anymore. We don't know where it is. Perek Yud Pasuk Aleph. Vayasem Hamelech Achashverosh mas ala aretz ve'iyayam. Achashverosh levied a tax on the mainland and the islands of the sea. 100 of his provinces were continental, and 27 were islands, and that's learned from the gematria of the words Iye is 27, Ve'iye Hayam is 27. So we see that there's 27 islands. Some say that this was on neighboring lands that were not part of his kingdom, but that Ahasuerus was able to assume with the help of Mordechai's advice. So here we see that Mordechai takes upon himself a new power. He's now in a high-level position in the government, and he's using that to help the king. Pasuk Bet. V'kol ma'aseh tokbo u'gvurato, all of his mighty and powerful acts, u'parashat gedulat Mordechai, and the account of the greatness of Mordechai, asher gidelo hamelech, whom the king had promoted, halohem ketuvim al sefer divrei yamim, are recorded in the book of Chronicles, the Malchei Madai Uparas, of the kings of Media and Persia. Ki Mordechai Yehudi, the final pasuk in Megilat Esther. For Mordechai, the Jew, Mishneh LaMelech Ahashverosh, was viceroy to King Ahashverosh. Vegadol HaYehudim, he was a great man among the Jews, and he found Veratzui Lerov Echav, and he found favor with many of his brothers. Torestov le'amo bedover shalom lekol zaro. He sought the good of his people and spoke for the welfare of all of his seed and his children. Veratzui Lerov Echav, Mordechai retained the favor of majority of his people, despite the power that he had. And the Malbim says, because he only looked for the good in the situation. But once he became involved in the kingdom, in statecraft, he had less time to study Torah. He could not devote much of his time to Kodesh, to holy matters. And as a result, says the Gemara Masechet Megillah, he didn't have unanimous support of all the Chachamim. Says the Ibn Ezra, one of my favorite Hidushim here, he says, there is absolutely no criticism intended for Mordechai. You know why? Because it's impossible to please everyone. In life, you will never please everyone. Even you could be Mordechai Yehudi. You could save the entire nation from annihilation. You can be promoted to become viceroy of the king, Mishneh LaMelech, and you're still not going to please everyone. It's a lesson in life. That's just simply what it is. Dover Shalom lekol zaro. And lastly, he spoke for the welfare of all of their descendants, the Jewish people's descendants. All of Bnei Israel became his descendants because they're alive as a result of his actions and Esther. All of his Esther, he made an effort to appease them. Some say he made an effort to appease even the non-Jews of Ahashverosh's kingdom so that they won't seek revenge against his own descendants. There was peace in the lands at this point. Some say he took all the money of Haman's estate and he put it towards the building of the Bet HaMikdash, and that's what brought shalom for future generations. The Ibn Ezra on this pasuk has a very interesting thought, and we'll conclude with this. He says, Zaro hem banav uvne banav. He's talking about his children and his grandchildren. Ulolam habanim yifhadu me'abihim. Normally, children fear their parents. They fear their fathers. Ve'hu hayad dover shalom batechila. But to his children, to his descendants, he would speak with peace. He would speak with calmness. Afilu lebanav shem ka'avadav. Even if his children or descendants were like his servants, because Mordechai was someone who, again, like we said, viceroy of the king, but he has every right to speak with them harshly. If a father speaks harshly to his son, lo kol sheken Mordechai. Ve'af ki le'amo. Ve'hineh hiskira katuv godel ma'alato v'atmatnuto. Therefore, the pasuk here is telling us an amazing trait of Mordechai on how humble he was. Kasher hiskir ken al Moshe Rabbeinu ve'aish Moshe anav me'od mikol ha'adam. Like it says about Moshe. Mordechai had the ability to treat, now at this position of greatness, like, okay, I'm here, you're down here, I'm in charge. No. Even at that point, he was a person who was dover shalom. He was a person who spoke peace, who promoted peace. And he knew that that was going to be the recipe of success as the Jews slowly but surely come out of the exile of Paras Umadai and make their way to Yerushalayim to eventually build the second Bet HaMikdash. We started with this story on the Jewish people stuck 70 years, a small exile, but yet one that was extremely scary. It was one where they were left with their hands up in the air, unknowing what was going to happen. But because of the bravery and the courage of two individuals, Mordechai and Esther, the Jewish people continue to live on. The Jewish people are still here. And although we do wait for the third Bet HaMikdash, maybe the end of this Megillah hints to us what we need in order to get that rebuilt. We need shalom. We need emet. We need to be truthful. We need to be straight. We need to be honest and genuine. We need to be peaceful. We need to love one another. This is the trait that Mordechai displayed to all of his brethren during these final moments of the Megillah. And although we don't quite know what happened, we know Esther eventually, she remained married to Ahasuerus. It is said that Mordechai and Esther are still buried in Iran, in Persia, which means that they may have not have left with the exodus out of Persia back to Yerushalayim with Ezra and the other greats, but nevertheless they set the stage for future success. Dover Shalom Lekol Zaro is the recipe we need for our future Beit HaMikdash, for the third Beit HaMikdash, and Bezrat Hashem, with the zechut, the merit, the chidushim, all the Torah that we study, all the wonderful midot that we portray, we take upon ourselves, the traits and midot that are learned from these two wonderful individuals, Mordechai ve'Esther, Mordechai Yehudi ve'Esther HaMalka. We will be zochet to that rebuilding. We'll be zochet to celebrate the holiday of Purim, because it will be the only holiday that will continue to exist when Mashiach comes. Megilat Esther will be the only sefer that we will continue to read, although we will still have the Torah, but we will still continue to read that sefer on this holiday, even though we will be zochet to see Mordechai and Esther b'techiyat hametim. And Bezrat Hashem, we will be zochet to see that rebuilding of the third Beit HaMikdash. I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining us over the last 6 weeks as we went through this Megillah. It's been a wonderful ride. It's been a wonderful journey. All these lectures are going to be posted on our website, findingholiness.com. Please feel free to share with you. Obviously, these videos are streamed live on YouTube and Facebook. Share the links with your friends. Let them hear some words of wisdom and inspiration and novelty before the Purim holiday. And the more we spread Torah, the more we spread holiness, the better the world will be, because holiness matters. Wishing everybody a wonderful night. Purim Sameach. Be well. Take care.